The rain had barely stopped when the package arrived at his doorstep, the silver box humming softly as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The man stared at it for a long moment, the words, "Smart Pet Unit, Model XN7, etched across the top in cold blue light. He had ordered it out of boredom, maybe a bit of loneliness, like so many others on the quiet fringes of Earth's outer colonies. A smart companion, harmless, efficient, simple. But as the seal broke and the lid lifted, the air shifted. Inside wasn't metal or plastic, not circuits or wires. It was a girl, not human. Her skin shimmered like liquid starlight, her silver-white hair clinging to her face as her eyes blinked open for the first time. She didn't speak, but when her gaze met his, something ancient and powerful moved between them. The world outside went silent, and in that silence, deep in the dark corners of space, someone, or something, knew she had been found. At first, he thought it was some sort of advanced synthetic design, maybe an experimental AI, but there was something too real about the way she flinched when he touched her shoulder, the way she shivered when the cold air hit her skin. She didn't respond to voice commands like the manuals promised. She didn't move like a machine. She moved like someone who was afraid. He wrapped her in a blanket, unsure of what to do, watching the strange markings on her wrist glow faintly like starlight trapped under skin. That night, while she slept on the couch, the lights in his house flickered. His comlink picked up encrypted frequencies he had never seen. Satellites blinked out for seconds at a time. And far above Earth, the Galactic Council began tracking an energy signature they had thought was extinct. He thought he had bought a smart pet. In reality, he had just triggered an interstellar manhunt. The girl began to learn quickly, too quickly. By the second day, she could mimic words. By the third, she understood him. But what frightened him wasn't her intelligence. It was the fear in her eyes when she heard the faint sound of engines in the sky. She would go still, trembling as if every vibration carried a memory. One night, when he tried to access the chip embedded behind her ear, a holographic projection burst from the floor. He saw stars, fleets, entire civilizations drawn in light. A single name repeated in her soft, broken voice. Not a brand. Not a serial code. A warning. She hadn't escaped from a lab. She had escaped from something much bigger, something watching. While governments dismissed strange readings as atmospheric interference, humanity's intelligence agencies weren't so naive. A fleet of alien warships had been detected in the outer rings of the solar system. The Galactic Council had declared the presence of an unregistered biological entity of strategic value. They were coming for her. They had always come for her kind. She wasn't a pet. She was the last of a species that once held the power to turn stars into weapons. She was a living key to technology the Council had buried under centuries of silence. And now, she was in the hands of a single human who had no idea what he was about to become part of. As their quiet days vanished into nights filled with tension and running footsteps, something shifted between them. She began to trust him, clinging to his hand when strange lights moved through the clouds, hiding behind him when military scanners passed over the house. He could have turned her in. The Council would have paid him more money than he'd ever see in a lifetime. But every time he saw how she looked at the sky, not with wonder but with terror, he couldn't. Humanity had always been underestimated by the galaxy. But one thing no alien race ever truly understood was how fiercely humans could protect something they decided to care for. And now he cared for her. The Galactic Council sent envoys first. Drones cloaked in silver light, landing silently on the outskirts of towns. They knocked on doors, smiled in perfect rehearsed patterns, and asked questions they already knew the answers to. They underestimated him. They always did. He had grown up in a world that taught humans to bow to alien powers, to obey the Council's laws like they were carved into the stars themselves. But as he watched them move closer, saw the fear growing in her trembling hands, something old inside him woke up, the stubborn, iron will that humanity was famous for. When they finally came for her, they expected submission. They got fire. He had spent days preparing the old tunnels beneath the house, rerouting old colony defense systems that hadn't been touched in years. The moment the drones breached his perimeter, the ground lit up with trip mines, EMP bursts, and plasma spikes. They thought they were the hunters. Instead, they walked into a trap set by someone who wasn't supposed to matter. In the chaos, he grabbed her hand and ran, not away from the fight but straight into the forest toward the hidden spaceport. The girl no longer looked like someone afraid to exist. There was something fierce in her now, the way she moved, the way she held onto his arm like a soldier instead of a lost creature. Above the planet, the Council's fleet descended. Whole cities trembled under the thunder of alien engines. But humanity wasn't blind anymore. The arrival of the fleet triggered an emergency broadcast, and for the first time in decades, the Council's quiet control over Earth began to fracture. Leaders demanded answers. Citizens recorded everything. And somewhere between the smoke and chaos, a single man and an alien girl disappeared into the night sky aboard a stolen transport, carrying with them a secret the galaxy had tried to bury. She spoke to him for the first time as the stars streaked past the window, her voice soft but clear, telling him what she was, what they had done to her people, and why the Council would never stop chasing her. But she didn't expect the way he answered. Not with fear, not with pity, but with a quiet, defiant smile. Humanity had lived under alien rule for too long. It had been waiting for a spark. Maybe he thought this was it. The Council thought they were chasing one girl. They didn't realize they had just handed humanity a reason to fight back. The war began not with a fleet, but with a single stolen ship. The Council's forces spread through the stars, hunting them across empty systems and forgotten outposts. But with each chase, more humans began to listen. Stories of an alien girl and the man who defied the Council spread like fire through hidden channels and resistance cells. Humanity, once quiet and obedient, began to stir. Old weapons came out of vaults. Rebel fleets that had been sleeping for years started moving again. The Council tried to crush the story, but they couldn't, because it wasn't a story anymore. It was a spark they could no longer control. The girl's powers began to return the deeper they went into space. Energy flared beneath her skin like fire waiting to be unleashed. She could sense where the Council ships moved, feel their weapons before they fired. And he, once just a lonely man who bought a companion to fill silence, had become the figure they whispered about across entire systems. A human who said no. A human who ran not to hide, but to light a fire. When the Council finally cornered them near the edge of a dying star, they came with everything. Fleets, hunters, execution orders written in bloodless law. They demanded she return, that he surrender, that humanity remain silent. But humanity has never been good at staying silent. He stepped forward with her at his side, and together, they unleashed the storm. Her power ripped through the Council's blockade like lightning through dry sky. Their fleet faltered. And then came the moment no one expected. Other humans joined the fight. Smugglers, miners, soldiers. Entire fleets that had once been scattered rose up from the dark. The Council had spent centuries underestimating humanity. That night, under the light of a burning star, they learned why they shouldn't have. The galaxy would never be the same again. All because a lonely man bought what he thought was a smart pet, and found a girl who would change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories. Your support keeps the legends of humanity alive, and there are many more to come. The wind howled against the side of the old colony house as the night deepened, and the silver-haired girl lay curled under the blanket like something fragile trying to disappear into the world. The man sat across the room, his hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea he hadn't touched, his eyes fixed on the flickering light panel above. It shouldn't have felt like this, like the world itself had tilted the moment he opened that box. A smart pet? That was what the company's advertisement had said. A quiet companion that would clean, learn, and respond to basic commands. But what lay on his couch wasn't a machine. It breathed too softly. The skin glowed too faintly. It flinched like something that remembered pain. And as the cold light touched her face, he realized that she wasn't just alive. She was terrified. She woke with a sharp gasp, her silver eyes wide, as if expecting chains. For a second, she looked around like a cornered animal, ready to run or fight. But when she saw him sitting there, not reaching for her, not speaking, just watching. Her panic softened into confusion. She whispered something in a language he didn't understand, a sound like water slipping over glass. The markings on her wrists flickered faintly again, as if answering her heartbeat. He raised his hands slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. She tilted her head, studying him in silence, and that small movement sent a shiver down his spine. Machines don't move like that. This wasn't a product. This was someone. Outside, far above the clouds, something else was watching too. A fragment of her activation signal had reached orbit the moment the box was opened, and a silent alarm rippled across hidden frequencies. Satellites turned their gaze. A council relay far out in the system blinked awake, and in a dimly lit control room, an alien officer narrowed his eyes at the old symbol flashing across his console. It was a symbol that hadn't appeared in centuries. A symbol tied to a war the galaxy swore had ended long ago. The officer sent the alert upward. Quietly, efficiently. No one on Earth would hear about it, at least not yet. Days passed, but the quiet didn't return. She learned faster than anything he'd ever seen. At first, she repeated words like a child, clumsy, broken. But by the third day, she spoke full sentences with the soft, uncertain tone of someone relearning something she'd lost. She followed him from room to room like a shadow, never far, always listening, always watching. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would jolt awake, clutching her wrist markings, her breath sharp like she'd seen something terrible. He started locking the doors, not because he feared her, but because something about the way she looked at the sky made him afraid of what was out there. He started digging into the shipping logs of the pet company, but what he found only made the air heavier. The shipping manifest was fake. The tracking number didn't exist. The company's domain had vanished a day after he placed the order. There was no return address, no records, no manufacturing data. It was as if the package had been slipped into the network like a ghost. And the more he dug, the more strange things began to happen. Unmarked drones appeared in the skies at night, their lights scanning the edges of his property. His comlink caught encrypted signals that flickered on and off, always repeating the same pulse pattern. It wasn't random. It was searching for her. One night, when the wind rattled the windows, she stood barefoot by the door, staring at the stars. Her silver hair shimmered faintly, her eyes reflecting constellations like they belonged to her. He asked her what she was looking at. Her voice was a whisper, soft and broken. "They are coming." He felt those words more than he understood them. In that instant, the quiet rural colony home no longer felt like a place. Felt like a target. In orbit, the Galactic Council convened quietly. A cloaked probe had confirmed the presence of a Class Omega energy signature on Earth, a power they thought they had buried long ago. Council envoys didn't speak in fear. They spoke in protocols. The protocol for this kind of anomaly was clear: retrieval or elimination. A fleet was already on standby in the shadows of Neptune's orbit. They didn't care who she was or what she wanted. They cared only about what she represented, a danger that could upend the careful balance they had built over centuries. But the Council didn't understand humanity the way they thought they did. They believed Earth was compliant, obedient, broken after years of silent control. They believed one man would hand her over without a fight. They believed wrong. The first test came quietly. A small drone touched down near his land at dusk, its sleek surface gleaming with faint council markings. It didn't knock on the door. It didn't speak. It projected a soft blue hologram into the night. A command, clean and cold: "Surrender the unit. This is a retrieval operation." The girl stepped back instantly, shaking, the markings on her wrist glowing like embers about to burst into flame. He could have obeyed. That would have been the smart thing to do. But something in her eyes, something human, something pleading, rooted him in place. He smashed the drone with an old steel bat before it could finish its message. From that moment on, there was no going back. The quiet life he knew was gone, burned out like a dying star. He reinforced the doors, sealed the windows, and began preparing like a man who already knew the war was on its way. She didn't ask to leave. She stayed beside him, silent, but in the way her trembling hands steadied when he started setting traps, he could tell she understood. He didn't know what she was. He didn't know why the council wanted her. But in that moment, standing in the cold night with the wreckage of the drone at his feet and the stars burning above, he made the choice that would change everything. Humanity has never been known for obedience. It's known for defiance. And one human defying the galaxy has always been enough to start a storm. The storm had rolled in just before sunset, wrapping the house in a cold silence that felt heavier than any weather he'd known. Thunder rolled far in the distance, slow and deep, like something vast waking up beneath the sky. The girl sat on the floor by the window, her knees drawn up to her chest, her silver hair clinging to the glass as she stared out at the rain with wide, frightened eyes. The man watched her from across the room, trying to understand what kind of world she came from that made her fear the sound of distant engines more than lightning. He had spent years alone on the colony's edge, where quiet nights stretched forever and nothing unexpected ever happened. But since the day he opened that box, everything felt different. The air itself carried a weight now, as if the world was holding its breath. The council wasn't just watching anymore. They were moving. The wreckage of the drone he destroyed had vanished overnight, erased by cleanup teams that left no trace except tire tracks in the mud. His comlink had been flooded with system updates that didn't exist in any Earth registry. Distant power grids flickered as something large moved into orbit. He didn't need to be told. They were coming. And not for him, for her. He glanced at the faint glow under her skin, those shifting markings pulsing like a heartbeat. They weren't just decoration. They were a beacon, a signal humming through space. The question wasn't if they would find them. It was when. On the third night after the drone, the sound of engines grew louder. Not colony vehicles. Something heavier, deeper, like the sky itself had begun to vibrate. She shot up from the window like a startled animal, her eyes wide, hands over her ears. She whispered something again in that strange language, voice trembling. He didn't need to understand the words to feel the fear in them. He pulled her away from the glass, scanning the sky through the dark, and then he saw them. 3 small black dots moving in formation, lights dim, slicing silently through the storm clouds. They weren't looking for him. They were homing in on the signal she couldn't turn off. He'd spent the last few nights preparing. Old colony tunnels, long abandoned, ran beneath the hills, a remnant from when Earth was still trying to pretend it had control over its own future. He had mapped them out, reinforced the entrances, rigged some with makeshift charges. It wasn't much, but it was enough to slow them down. He took her hand gently, and though she hesitated, her fingers gripped his tightly. She didn't speak, but her eyes asked the question her mouth couldn't. He nodded once, and she understood. By the time the landing craft touched the ground, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick fog that clung to the treeline. The council soldiers moved in silence, wrapped in sleek black armor that didn't belong to this world. Their helmets reflected the faint glow of their rifles, scanning the ground like predators. They weren't looking to negotiate. They were looking to retrieve. She recognized them instantly. Her breathing turned shallow, and for the first time, she whispered a word he could understand. Hunters. He pulled her down into the tunnels just as the first sweep passed over the house. The scanners sliced through the air, red beams crawling across walls and soil like searching hands. He held his breath as heavy footsteps echoed above, counting each one, memorizing the pattern. He knew how these retrievals worked. Quiet, fast, surgical. A family would vanish in the night and no one would speak of it the next morning. That was how the council kept its control over human colonies. Not with armies, but with silence. But tonight wouldn't be silent. A charge detonated near the west entrance, a thunderous crack splitting the night. The soldiers scattered, moving like shadows, rifles up. That was his signal. He grabbed the girl and moved deeper into the tunnels, the darkness wrapping around them like a second skin. His breath was steady, his steps precise. Years of living on the edge of civilization had taught him how to disappear. But the soldiers weren't fools. They followed. The glow from their scanners began to seep into the tunnel behind them, painting the walls red. She clutched his arm tighter, the markings on her wrist beginning to pulse faster, brighter, until they lit the tunnel like a faint lantern. He almost told her to dim it, then realized she couldn't. Whatever she was built to be found. That's when the first shot rang out, a flash of light tearing through the air and slamming into the wall beside them. He shoved her forward, ducking behind a support beam as sparks rained down. His old rifle, clunky and outdated, felt like nothing compared to the sleek weapons in the hands of the hunters. But he wasn't trying to win a clean fight. He was trying to make them bleed time. He triggered the first trap manually. The tunnel behind them lit up in a burst of white light as the charge ignited, sending rock and fire in both directions. The blast shook the ground, silencing the scanners for a few precious seconds. The two of them stumbled through the next passage, her breathing uneven, his chest burning. They could hear shouting now, calm, controlled, alien. The kind of soldiers who thought they'd already won. But they didn't know him, and they didn't know humanity the way they thought they did. When they reached the old elevator shaft, she stopped suddenly. Her eyes had gone distant, unfocused, like she was listening to something only she could hear. He whispered her name. She didn't have one, but he'd given her something to call herself, Leora. Her head snapped toward the surface, tears welling in her eyes. More, she whispered. More coming. He climbed the ladder, pulling her up behind him as distant engines grew louder. More landing craft, more hunters. This wasn't a small retrieval team anymore. This was an operation. They were throwing weight at something they couldn't afford to lose. And as the two of them burst out of the tunnel into the treeline, he finally saw why. A projection flickered in the clouds. A massive council ship descending like a black star. He turned to her, breath shaking. "Why you?" he asked. It wasn't anger. It was the desperate, raw question of a man who had just realized his life was no longer his own. She looked up at the ship, her silver hair whipping in the wind, and whispered something that wasn't meant for human ears. But the fear in her voice told him enough. Whatever she was, whatever power she carried, it was something the council wanted to bury forever. That night, running through the wet forest with fire behind them and stars watching from above, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about standing against something that had quietly controlled humanity for far too long. He didn't know how he would fight them. He didn't know if he'd survive. But he knew one thing with a clarity that burned through every doubt. They weren't taking her. Not while he was still breathing. The first warship cast its shadow over the trees. Humanity's storm had begun. The forest was alive that night. Not with the soft sounds of crickets or wind moving through the trees, but with the low, rumbling thrum of engines and the hiss of alien searchlights cutting through the darkness. Rainwater dripped from the leaves, steam rising where the heat of landing thrusters had scorched the ground. The man crouched low between the roots of an old oak, his arm protectively around Leora, her glowing markings hidden beneath the heavy cloak he'd wrapped around her. She trembled, not from the cold, but from the sound, the deep, pulsing growl of ships that once ruled entire star systems. The Galactic Council had arrived, and they hadn't come to ask. They had come to take. A dozen hunter squads moved through the trees like shadows, their armor reflecting faint streaks of red light, their scanners sweeping silently from trunk to trunk. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Their movements were too clean, too synchronized. These were execution teams, the kind sent when the council didn't want a story to reach the public. Their orders weren't capture. Their orders were silence. In orbit, a black cruiser drifted behind the clouds, its communications net blanketing the area, cutting the colony off from the outside world. No calls for help would go through. To everyone else, this forest was empty. The man had fought against fear before, but this was different. These weren't petty thieves or rogue machines. These were professionals trained to erase entire families without leaving footprints. And yet, something in him refused to run. Maybe it was the way she clutched his sleeve, like his existence was the only wall between her and a universe that wanted her gone. Or maybe it was something older, something buried deep inside humanity's bones. The instinct that had carried his species through every storm they weren't supposed to survive. He led her deeper into the forest, moving through the mist like a ghost. Every step had been planned. Every hidden path marked days earlier. This wasn't his first night running from something bigger than himself. He knew this land better than anyone. Knew where the rocks would slip, where the tunnels cut under the ground, where the rivers turned quiet enough to mask their scent. But the hunters weren't stupid. They were closing the net. He pressed her back against the damp wall of a ravine, signaling her to stay silent as two hunters passed above them. Their boots made no sound on the wet earth, only the faint hum of their scanners filling the air like a distant heartbeat. She pressed her glowing wrists against her chest, squeezing hard until the light dimmed beneath her skin. He held his breath, listening to the rhythm of their movements, timing it. When the sound faded, he grabbed her hand, and they slipped through the narrow gap between two boulders, disappearing into the underground passage like smoke. The tunnel was cold, the air thick with the damp smell of stone. He flicked on a small, dim light, just enough to see the ground ahead. She followed close, her breathing fast but quiet. He could hear the tremor in it. Not weakness but memory. She'd been hunted before. He didn't need to ask. The way she flinched at distant sounds told him enough. Halfway through the tunnel, she spoke in a whisper that barely reached him. "Why help me?" The words were awkward, shaped by a tongue not made for this language but clear. He didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure he had an answer. Why did a man who lived alone on the edges of a quiet colony decide to defy the most powerful force in the galaxy? But as he looked at her, small and shaking and still trying to keep moving, he realized the answer wasn't complicated. "Because they shouldn't get to decide who lives and who doesn't," he finally said. And for the first time since he'd opened that box, she looked at him not with fear, but with something like trust. Outside, the council shifted tactics. The hunters weren't making progress. The signal that had led them here was moving, unpredictable. So they brought in the Seekers, drones made to smell out energy patterns at a molecular level. They rose from the dropships like silent silver moths, fanning out across the forest. One by one, their eyes flickered blue as they caught the faint pulse of her kind. A soundless alarm spread through the net. They had her location. The man felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air, the faint vibration beneath his boots. The Seekers were near. He quickened his pace, pulling her behind him through the maze of rock. She stumbled once, and he caught her arm, steadying her. They emerged from the tunnel into an open clearing near the old river, the fog thicker here, the moonlight cutting thin beams through the mist. He knew this place well. He had buried things here, old machines, stolen components, weapons nobody else believed a quiet man like him should have. She stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the river, her breath fogging in the air. "They found me before," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Every time. They always find me." "Then this time," he said, loading the pulse rifle he hadn't touched in years, "they'll wish they hadn't." The first Seeker broke through the tree-line, its blue light sweeping like a blade. He aimed carefully, fired once, and the drone exploded into a shower of sparks. Two more came behind it, then 6, then 10. The hunters followed in their wake, black armor moving through fog like a tide of death. And yet he stood his ground. Humanity had learned long ago how to fight when the odds were impossible. The clearing turned into fire and chaos. He moved with brutal efficiency, picking targets, hitting weak points, using the fog to vanish between shots. The drones screamed and died one by one, crashing into the mud. The hunters advanced in formation, their rifles humming with plasma fire, but every step forward cost them bodies. Behind him, she stood still, the markings on her wrists blazing brighter than they ever had. Her fear was no longer a tremor. It was a storm. She raised her hands slowly, and the light around her flared like a living star. For the first time, he saw what she truly was. The air itself bent around her, rippling like water, and the remaining drones froze mid-air as if caught in invisible hands. One by one, their lights went out. The hunters faltered. No one had told them she could do this. No one had warned them what kind of power they were walking into. And in that heartbeat of hesitation, he moved. Together, human defiance and alien power turned the clearing into a trap. When the last hunter fell, The night was silent except for the crackle of burning machines. She collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her light fading. He rushed to her side, kneeling in the wet grass. She looked at him through half-closed eyes, her voice a whisper. They won't stop. They never stop. He knew she was right. Up there, in orbit, they had only just begun. But something else was happening too. Something the Council hadn't planned for. Their retrieval team had been crushed, and that meant the story was no longer quiet. Other humans would hear, and once humanity heard, nothing in the galaxy could keep it silent. He looked up at the night sky, ships glimmering like distant stars, and felt something he hadn't in a very long time. Not fear. Resolve. They had chosen the wrong planet. And the wrong human. The storm wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The wreckage of the Hunter Squad still smoldered in the clearing long after the fighting had ended. Metal fragments hissed as the rain cooled them, and the blackened ground smelled of ozone and scorched earth. The forest around them was silent now. Not the kind of peaceful silence that came with nightfall, but a watchful, heavy quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The man knelt beside Leora, wrapping a coat around her shaking shoulders. Her wrists still pulsed with faint silver light, weaker than before but steady. She had unleashed something powerful, something she hadn't even fully understood herself, and the forest bore the scars of it. The drones lay like broken insects in the mud, their blue eyes dead, their comm signals jammed. The hunter bodies were already cooling in the rain. But above them, the warship still hovered unseen behind the clouds, its long shadow stretching across the stars. He knew what this meant. They wouldn't send another retrieval team this time. The Council's playbook was predictable. When quiet retrieval failed, they escalated. They would paint this entire zone as a containment hazard, fabricate a cover story, and erase everything in a clean orbital sweep. That was how they handled anyone who dared break their order. No witnesses, no survivors, no trace. The Council didn't negotiate with problems. They erased them, and this time he and Leora were the problem. She leaned weakly against his shoulder, her voice soft and trembling. They will bring more. I know, he whispered. That's why we can't stay. Her fingers clutched his sleeve tightly, a silent plea he didn't fully understand. She wasn't just running for her life. She'd been running for a long time, long before he ever opened that box. That kind of fear leaves a mark. But something else burned beneath it now. It wasn't only fear anymore. It was something closer to determination. They moved fast, gathering everything they could carry, emergency rations, a rifle, a comm disruptor, the old keycard to the colony's underground transport line. She was still weak from what she'd done, but she didn't complain, didn't falter. She followed close behind as he led her down through the hidden tunnels beneath the hills. He'd dug them years ago, paranoid of a day like this, a day when the Council stopped pretending they cared about humans. Back then, everyone had laughed at his preparations. No one was laughing now. Deep underground, where the air was cold and still, they stopped beside an old rail pod covered in dust and vines. It was a relic from the early colonization era, long decommissioned, but he had kept it alive in secret. He brushed his hand over the console, and the pod shuddered as power flowed through its veins for the first time in years. A low hum filled the tunnel. The pod wasn't fast by Council standards, but it would get them far from here before the orbital strike came. But before they could board, the walls of the tunnel vibrated. A deep, slow rumble. He froze. That wasn't thunder. That was the sound of a warship charging its targeting array. Above ground, the Council cruiser shifted into position, its belly opening like a silent predator. High above the colony, the sky flickered faintly as energy began to gather. The Council didn't care who else lived in this area. To them, this was already a dead zone. The man grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her into the pod. As the door slammed shut, the rail line shuddered and lurched forward, throwing them into darkness. The tunnel walls blurred as they accelerated, the pod's old systems groaning under the sudden speed. He could feel the air pressure change as the blast doors behind them sealed automatically. A second later, the earth above where they had been hiding vanished in a blinding flash of light. The cruiser had fired. Everything they'd touched, the house, the clearing, the tunnels, was gone. The council's clean sweep had begun. Inside the pod, Leora sat pressed against the wall, shaking. The flash of the explosion was reflected in her silver eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do they want me gone so badly?" He leaned back against the console, chest still heaving from the sprint. "Because people like them always fear what they can't control," he said. "And something tells me they've been afraid of your kind for a long time." She lowered her head. "There were more of us," she said softly. "Long ago. We could speak to the stars, bend the silence between them. The council said we were dangerous, so they destroyed everything. I was hidden, but they always find me." Her voice cracked like thin glass, each word heavy with memories she had buried just to survive. He reached out slowly, resting his hand on hers. She stiffened for a second, then didn't pull away. "They're not going to take you," he said, his voice steady even though his heart was pounding. "Not while I'm still breathing." The pod hurtled deeper underground, heading toward the old central transit hub, an abandoned complex buried beneath the colony's foundations. As they emerged into the wide chamber, the lights flickered weakly. It was dark and empty, the air thick with the scent of rust and old machines. But to him, it felt like freedom. It meant they weren't ash. It meant they had one more move. He worked fast, pulling an old terminal online, bypassing its outdated security protocols. Leora watched silently, the faint silver light on her skin illuminating the dust floating in the air. She didn't understand human machines, not like this. But she understood something else. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hands never hesitated. Humans weren't powerful like the council, but they were stubborn. And stubbornness, she was learning, was sometimes more dangerous than power. While he hacked into the network, the council fleet adjusted its orbit. New ships were arriving, larger, heavier, their engines burning cold blue against the stars. This was no longer a retrieval operation. This was a full containment order. They weren't just after her. They were after the idea of her existing. Then the warning klaxon on the terminal screamed. Council reinforcements had landed at the colony's east border. A new grid of hunter squads was fanning out, faster than before. They'd be here in less than an hour. He looked at her then, not like she was a burden, not like she was a thing to be protected, but like a partner. "You said your people could speak to the stars," he said. "Can you still do it?" She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "It's dangerous," she whispered. "If I try, they'll hear me too." He leaned closer, his voice low, steady. "Then let them. If they can hear you, maybe someone else can too. Someone who isn't them." For the first time, she nodded, not in fear but in resolve. She closed her eyes, placing both hands on the cold metal floor. The light beneath her skin flared to life, bright and blinding, pulsing like the heartbeat of a star. The terminal's lights flickered, the comm net crackled, and somewhere far beyond the reach of the council's control, a signal whispered into the void. In orbit, alarms exploded across council ships. The energy readings spiked off the charts, louder and clearer than anything they'd ever seen. "She's broadcasting," one officer barked, panic threading through their perfect discipline. "She's reaching beyond the grid." "And far away, beyond the borders of council territory," someone answered. The man stood over her, rifle in hand, as the station trembled under the approaching hunter squads. He didn't know who had heard her call. He didn't know if they were friend or foe. But for the first time since this began, he felt the balance shift. Not in the council's favor, but in humanity's. And maybe in hers. She opened her eyes slowly, silver light fading to a soft glow. "They heard me," she whispered. "I don't know who they are, but they heard me." He tightened his grip on the rifle and looked up at the ceiling where distant thunder rolled. "Then let's make sure we're still alive when they get here." Outside, the hunters closed in. Inside, the old station came alive for the first time in decades. And above, a new light, one not belonging to the council, was moving fast through the void. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The rain had returned by the time the first wave of hunter squads reached the perimeter of the old station. But this time, the storm no longer sounded like background noise. It was a drumbeat, a heartbeat, a warning. The man stood near the old rail platform with his rifle slung across his shoulder, his breathing steady, every nerve in his body tuned to the vibrations in the ground. They were coming fast. The council didn't use hesitation in their playbook. Once they decided to eliminate a problem, they moved like a blade, precise, relentless, unstoppable. But what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that humanity didn't break when cornered. Humanity sharpened. Leora stood at the center of the station, her silver markings glowing brighter than they ever had before, the air around her shimmering with a low pulse that made the old metal walls groan. She looked different now. Not like the trembling girl hiding in a blanket on his couch, but like something ancient, something the galaxy had tried and failed to erase. She could feel their ships above, feel the hum of their orbital targeting systems searching for her like a predator sniffing through the dark. And beneath that cold, cruel presence, she felt something else, an answer. A whisper in the stars, growing closer. Whoever had heard her signal was on their way. But they weren't here yet, and the council would burn everything before they gave her another chance to speak. The old transit tunnels echoed with the distant rhythmic thuds of boots. The hunters were inside. Their footsteps didn't rush. They were confident, moving like professionals certain of their kill. He moved with practiced silence, setting remote charges on the support beams, sealing doors behind him, every motion fueled not by panic but by clarity. Years of quiet life on the edge of the colony had taught him how to survive. But what he was doing now wasn't just survival. It was war. The first shots echoed through the tunnel as they breached the outer gate. Plasma bolts carved glowing streaks across the platform, cutting into rusted walls and sending showers of sparks into the dark. He ducked behind a column, waited for the rhythm of their movement, then fired once, clean through the visor of the lead hunter. The body hit the ground without a sound. Leora flinched at the gunfire but didn't run this time. She stood rooted in the center of the room, fingers clenched, breathing in short, fast bursts. He tossed a detonator into the tunnel. The explosion roared like thunder, shaking dust from the ceiling as fire rolled through the passage. Hunters scattered, shouting in their language, their perfect formation splintering for just a heartbeat. That was all humanity ever needed, a heartbeat. He picked them off with careful precision, every shot burning through their confidence. But there were too many. For every hunter that fell, 3 more poured through the tunnels. The ground shook as heavier footsteps joined the fight. Mechanized infantry units, their armor glowing with the cold light of council tech. He'd fought mercenaries before, scavengers, raiders. But this wasn't that. This was the full weight of a galactic power bearing down on 2 people the galaxy wasn't supposed to care about. She looked at him then, voice breaking through the noise. "You can still run," she said. "They want me, not you." He turned to her, eyes hard, jaw set. "They came to my world. They think they can burn it to ash. I don't run from that." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something else, but the next wave hit before she could. Dozens of drones filled the air like a metallic swarm, their targeting lights painting the walls in red. He fired and moved, never staying in one place, using the shadows, the debris, every inch of the old station to stretch out the fight. He knew he couldn't kill them all, but he didn't need to. He just needed to delay. Leora stepped forward slowly, the silver light in her veins flaring brighter. She raised her hands, and the station trembled as invisible energy rippled out from her like a shockwave. The swarm froze midair. Not 1 or 2, all of them. The drones hovered as if gripped by unseen hands, their lights flickering in panic. The hunters behind them hesitated. She exhaled, and the drones collapsed like metal rain, crashing to the floor in a wave of sparks. For a moment, the entire station went silent except for the sound of her breathing. That silence shattered when a council gunship tore through the outer wall, its engines screaming as it unleashed a barrage of fire. The station floor cracked, steel twisted, and the shockwave sent them both sprawling. He tasted blood as he dragged himself behind cover, blinking away the ringing in his ears. The gunship hovered like a beast, its weapons tracking them with mechanical precision. She struggled to stand, her legs shaking, but the markings on her skin burned like molten light. She stepped into the open, staring up at the gunship as if she wasn't afraid anymore. Fired again. The blast should have torn her apart. Instead, the energy bent around her like a river breaking against stone. She didn't fully understand her own power, but she didn't need to. She felt it, like a storm building inside her chest, old and terrible. She spread her arms, and the energy exploded outward. The gunship's lights blinked out like a candle in the wind, its hull twisting, imploding in a flash of brilliant light. The explosion tore through the station, shaking the tunnels and sending hunters scattering like insects. He ran to her, catching her before she could collapse. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were clear. "They won't stop," she whispered again. The same words she'd said on the first night they met. But this time, there was no despair in them. There was something harder, something sharper. Outside, the fleet began its final descent. They were preparing for a full orbital strike, a burn that would erase everything within 100 kilometers. But the Council wasn't the only one who had heard her signal anymore. Far above the planet, cutting through the void like a blade, a fleet of unknown ships appeared on the long-range scanners. Not Council, not human government, something else, something older. Panic swept through the Council command net. The Admiral demanded immediate containment, but it was already too late. A voice broke through the encrypted channel, a voice that didn't belong to any Council officer. Calm, cold, familiar to her. "We found you," the voice said. "And we found them too." The man tightened his grip on her hand as the walls shook again. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the look in her eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. The Council wasn't in control anymore. Above, light filled the sky as two fleets met for the first time in centuries. The colony night turned to day. The ground thundered, and humanity stood in the middle of a storm far larger than itself. She looked at him, her voice soft against the distant roar of war. "You could have left," she said. He smiled faintly, blood drying on his lip. "Yeah," he said, "but that's not what humans do." And when the first beams of light cut across the stars, when the Council fleet finally realized it was no longer the hunter but the hunted, the legend began. Not of a soldier, not of a hero, but of a man who opened a box, met an alien girl, and stood his ground against an empire. The galaxy would whisper about it for generations. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories. Your support keeps humanity's legends alive, and the storm is far from over.